Well, welcome everybody back to Images by Design Studios. I'm Jim Setzer, and our workshop tonight is all about exporting. I don't know, who in this room came up with this? Was it you? Good, then I expect to hear a lot of comments from you because I had to throw this together at the very last minute. Basically, look, these are just my experiences and opinions, right? So I'm sure I've missed some really important stuff in here, but Pete, you've been printing stuff for forever, and so we've got some good knowledge base, I think, and we can have a pretty decent conversation about that. Like as usual, let's do a around the room introductions. Talk about, let's say, what you normally export for, whether it be social media or to your website or to print. Is it for yourself or for customers? Go ahead.
I do all of those. And
Well, tell us your name.
Nancy Carruthers.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah.
I was a PR director and communications director, and then I did created all those sort of products and had to export for all of those.
Okay.
And each one can face a different challenge.
Absolutely. Sure. All right.
All right. Stephanie Reefley.
Hi.
And I've only been shooting for a couple of years. Most of my exporting is for social media right now. I do print some things for classes, classes that I'm in and taking and printing out, and generally find that I am underexposed when I print.
Yeah.
So that I would like to correct and fix and learn how to do it right.
Yeah. The funny thing is, paper's not backlit.
Yeah. No, neither is canvas.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
And it kind of deadens the colors. What do I need to do to make things look
All right. Yeah. We'll talk about all that. Okay. Annette.
Okay, I'm Annette Averett, and I'm really only export for social media as well, but I'm just starting to try and figure out how to export for printing, because, I've done canvas prints, and all I know, and I don't even know if I do that right, is I just uncheck the limit box, and I put 300 DPI, and I send it off to JPEG, and I send it up, and it comes back looking good on canvas now. I don't know how my metal print's gonna look, because I did the same thing for metal.
Yeah. All right. Good. I can't wait to see that. Those trees are going to be beautiful.
Amazing.
Yep. Daniel.
Dan George, I do everything from social media to metal to print for customers and for myself just to see what it looked like.
All right. Great. Mike.
I'm Michael Lemke, and I do it for basically social media and everything. I'd like to start printing some stuff, but really, it's a shot in the dark what settings to even for exporting to post it to Facebook or something.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to start printing some because, believe it or not, I think I've actually taken a few good pictures now and then. So I'd like to put some, start maybe putting some up on some walls and going from there.
Great. Thanks. Pete.
Pete Federico, I don't know nothing about nothing.
That's why I works for Canon.
I don't know nothing about nothing.
I don't believe you there, Pete.
After I'm done editing out of Lightroom, I will export the file twice. I will do a full res, full size, and I will scale one down to a 4:6 with a watermark to go to social media, which I know I'm losing resolution by doing that. So hopefully I'm gonna pick up some little tricks and like I said, if I learn one thing, it was worth the time.
Great. Well, like I said, I am by no means an expert in this area. I have my experiences and my opinions. So I threw a bunch of topics on a board here. If you see anything, we just add it in. This is pretty free for all today, right? Let's see. So why is understanding exporting so important? My first thought was, well, you want to preserve as much of your image data as you possibly can. You went to a lot of pain to capture that beautiful, crisp image and those beautiful, wonderful colors. You don't want to lose that as you export, as you print, as you share on social media, as you put it on your website. You want all that detail to be as much as possible for whatever the media is you're sending it to. And it's your art, right? So you want things to be properly represented. You don't want reds to turn orange. And If you're doing product photography, it's got to be spot on. If it's going to a catalog and the red sweater looks orange, people may not buy it because you don't have the colors palette just right. And so that's all really important. And we all want happy customers, and I maybe I need a better term. I mean, whoever the consumer of your art is, whether that's your grandkids or your friends on Facebook or clients there paying you money, you want their skin tones to be right. You want that shirt to pop with just those right color. So you want everybody to be happy. You don't want people to look at it and go, there's something wrong with that. And they might not know what it is. Maybe, you know, something's not quite right with it. They can't quite put their finger on it, but we as photographers don't know what it is. We didn't get the color quite right. The luminance is off. You know, we've unsharpened the picture in the process. All those things all happen, very, very common things. So that's what we want to kind of explore this space a little bit so we can try to avoid some of those and you know, get the most out of our images. Any other thoughts, comments? Why else are you here?
That's it.
Those are it? Okay, good. All right, well, I got that slide. I want to take a quick, most of what we're going to talk about tonight is raster images. Those are arrays of pixels, right? Right? And so we're all pretty familiar with that, right? We zoom in Photoshop until we get the little grid, and you can literally edit pixel per pixel raster images. But a lot of times you need a vector image. Anybody want to take a stab at defining a vector image?
I know you can rescale it without making it all wonky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the end product, right?
Thing about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So for instance, I made this as a vector image so that I could scale it to whatever size I want and I don't lose resolution. I'm going to take a quick segue here to show you that. Unlike raster images that are literally arrays of pixels, a vector image is a normalized coordinate system that's comprised of lines and arcs. So it's instructions on how to draw the thing is what it is. And I'm going to just, let's see. Here you go. There's my logo. And if you look at this.
It's quite pretty.
That's a nice logo, whatever it is, though.
What's that?
Are we on an acid trip?
Oh, what happened to it? Oh, I know. I must be still in presentation mode. Hang on. I guess I've got to take this out of
What is
presentation.
that? I'm just curious.
What is what? Oh, that's some wallpaper.
Oh.
Alien skull.
Yeah. All right. So how do I?
You can't literally walk through that place.
No.
No. Okay.
Like in PowerPoint.
Yeah. It's it's PowerPoint when you put it in presentation mode. It does
That's
all
cool.
these things.
There it goes.
I don't know.
And now it's doing crazy stuff. Okay. So how's that look? Yeah. Yeah. There's that.
Oh, wow.
And see, as you get closer in this, I'm going to do this.
It don't pixelate.
Yeah. So I'm going to just basically show you what's hidden in here. Okay. So the image is made up of these instructions. I've got Bezier curves in here. And I've got line segments and things I can move around. I selected that set of points, so I can move it around. So this is literally what gets saved on the file. It's this set of instructions for redrawing this picture anytime you needed to. So whether this is 2 inches by 3 inches or 60 feet by 40 feet, all those curves are going to maximize resolution of however you output it, whether that be an LCD display or a printer or whatever. So I thought I'd just kind of deviate to that for a little bit because sometimes, especially if you're printing something really, really big, you might want to convert your image to this format and work in that.
Or a watermark.
Well, in Photoshop, you can pull it in and you can tell it to create a path around an area. This package will do the same thing. I can pull in an image, and obviously the more complex the image, this is going to get really, really crazy after a while. So simple images usually, especially with simple colors and things. But yeah, it'll literally draw around things. And you'll get a lot of extra points that you might just erase that you don't need. You can clean up the image after you've converted it a little bit. So it does take a little bit of work. But once you're done, now you've got something that is infinitely scalable,
You
like
could
Pete said.
send it out to the guy that make your shirts, and the guy that make your magnet for your car, and your billboard, and your banner, and
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Gosh. Huh.
no matter what size they're making, which bird.
All right.
Ah,
Let's go back to that. Where were we? Okay, so let's see if I missed any points on that. Vector images. So it's based on that. Like I said, it's a coordinate system, right? It's the relative positions to each other. There's no beginning or end. It's just a relative kind of position stuff. Made of lines and segments, infinitely scalable. Yeah, and we all know what raster images are all about, right?
Somebody mentioned watermarks. Is that what they use as the vector image for a lot of these watermarks? They put in the, oh, it fits perfectly in this little mirror, or fits perfectly on this box in their picture and stuff.
Well, a lot of times they are, but remember, if you apply it to an image, it's going to be scaled to that resolution, and then it becomes part of your raster image at the end. But yeah, again, it scales down just as well as it scales up. So what I typically do is I just have that raster image around. I can import and apply it as a watermark, very, very small or very, very big, and it looks pretty good either way,
So when you import it, you can make it bigger or smaller based on the picture you're putting it
Oh
on?
yeah, it's like in Photoshop, it's a layer like anything else, and you can transform it just like you do any other layer.
you can also make it real small and hide it somewhere in your picture, like a tree. And if somebody steals your image, you say, well, you know what, you can blow it up and use your proof it.
Sneaky Pete.
I'm from New York, I don't trust nobody.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing you want to consider when outputting your art is any change in resolution, either upscaling or downscaling. So I just grabbed this quick little thing. This is obviously it's talking about 4K video versus 1080p, but you get the idea, right? You're going to have more pixels, the higher resolution. If you downscale a higher resolution image to a lower resolution image, you're obviously going to lose a lot of detail in the process. You have to. There's no place for that data to go. If you upscale, traditionally upscaling was bad as well because you'd end up with this giant blocky thing that looks like you made it in Minecraft. And but actually there are a lot of really interesting algorithms these days that interpolate that transition. And so it's amazing the amount of detail that they're able to extract with artificial intelligence and some other things to bring detail back when they upscale. But it's not something you're going to have in Lightroom or Photoshop. These are custom algorithms that are designed, movie studios and people that have big pockets and lots of horsepower can do that sort of stuff. But just be aware of what upscaling and downscaling does as you import and export your data.
Can I throw something out here, and I might be jumping ahead of you?
Please do.
When you downscale, if you shot in RAW and you shot I'm gonna make up a number, 12 by 15, and you downscale that, okay, you are throwing out pixels, you're throwing out data. And depending on the program using the downscale, you will lose sharpness.
Oh, definitely.
But I don't even know, so like when I shoot RAW and it comes into Lightroom, it comes in as like a 2x3, which is
So
converts to a
that's-
4x6, so I don't
That's the way
understand
Matt-
that whole
That's the way
thing.
Matt brings in the thumbnails. You gotta be on a Mac, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the way you're importing it into your program.
Remember we were talking about metadata before? Yeah, so it's that
So I need to
that's that
look at the-
thumbnail.
I need to look at the metadata and see what
Yeah.
the size
So
of the
once
thumbnail
you've generated your previews in Lightroom, those previews are going to replace those thumbnails, and they'll be the standard 4:6 aspect ratio.
If you scroll over those pictures at the very bottom, you can see what the picture, what the size is by just scrolling
okay.
the picture, or you go to the library and you go to the metadata like what Jim was talking about, and if you show it again also, so you got two locations where you can find your picture size. I just normally scroll over along the bottom and tell me what size my picture is.
Okay.
So basically, if you're going to take that RAW file and shrink it down, you might want to look into sharpening it after you shrunk it. Because you're gonna get some fuzziness that you weren't expecting. Again, I don't know if I was jumping ahead of you, but I don't know if that was part of this or something you were gonna get into.
Well, we talked about it a little bit when we were talking about the under the hood Lightroom stuff, about the things you touch on when you're.
Scaling down,
Mhm.
losing the pixels and.
Yeah, yeah. So that sharpening, like he was saying, after you export to some lower resolution, we'll put something back. It's not going to be as elegant. It's not going to turn that into that, but it's going to do something, right? It'll try to blend. You know, it won't be like red to white. It'll put these like pinkish pixels along the edges and try to bring that. That's how it's going to do its sharpening. I'll blend that stuff in. Oh, the hard one, color spaces. Who knows what color spaces are?
That's RGB.
That's one.
RGB.
Yeah, the Adobe RGB is another. They're just basically digital representations of the visible spectrum, right? And our cameras, well, almost all of our cameras in here are RGB sensors. So the RGB is the native color space where the red and the blue and the green channel are represented by a value from 0 to 255. So 16 million possible colors. That's a color space. And if you look at there, so that standard color space kind of shows you a triangle in there, and it's a good portion of the visible spectrum, but it's not the whole thing. Other versions of RGB color spaces that have more bits to them can provide more colors in the spectrum. And so Adobe RGB, ProPhoto RGB is probably the closest to a complete coverage of the visible spectrum of the RGB color spaces. RGB color spaces are additive, meaning you start with black, like a black screen that's turned off, and you add color to it. Okay, so like I was saying, RGB color spaces are additive. You start with something black, like no light coming into your sensor, or your monitor's turned off, and you add the color to the black. You add reds, you add blues, you add greens, and the more you add to those, they bring the luminance with them, and that's how that kind of color space works. And that's why it's used by Photoshop and Lightroom and all these kind of things, because you're using it with displays. That's what's presenting the colors to you. Printers, conversely, are subtractive color devices. They start with white, close to pure white. No paper is white, right? Every paper's got a little bit of a tint to it. Every papers have different textures, so that you don't start with pure white, but you start with something like that. And then you use, what are they? Cyan, magenta, yellow, and K for black, because I guess they were dyslexic that day. But those are the colors that you subtract from white to get the desired color. That's why you see that CMYK color space for printing. That's what your print labs are going to convert your image to in order to send it to a printer to do it. And that's what your desktop printer uses as well. You ever notice the colors in your inkjet printer are usually cyans and magentas, and anything that's designed to print photos anyway is going to be a CYMK color space. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. If your lab is asking you to send them your files converted into that color space, you need to ask them for the printer profile for that CMYK color space, because just converting to just generic CMYK could just turn into a bloody mess. Most labs now just take RGB because they know they've got to do that. It's not just the machine, it's the lot of the paper, it's the lot of the ink that they're using that day. They all have really minute changes in how that color space actually works together. So they've got formulas that they work on. So that's why it's not really a problem anymore that a lab is forcing you to take your pictures. That being said, some of the tools that are still out there, like ROES and some of those things, if you're not using a color space that understands, it won't even import the pictures. So if you start using those tools and you're having a hard time struggling to import the picture, you might check what version of RGB color space you're currently running it as. You may have to convert to another color space in order to be able to have those programs read them so they can then send the final product up to the lab for printing.
I'm aware they're getting away from that though, right? The ROES?
Yeah, I think it is pretty bit old clunky kind of system, and I think a lot of the bigger labs are just building their own designer, because you want to be able to do all the photo book products and all these other print products that ROAS can't really even do because it's going to be dependent on the product offering that your lab provides you, right? Different aspect
When you
ratios.
say printer profile, when you go to the company, hey, can you send me whatever profile, color profile, what are they sending you and what do you do with it?
Oh, okay, so let's go take a look at that. Let's take a look at Lightroom first.
Good question, Mike, good question.
And again, this is kind of old school because you usually don't need to do this anymore. Let's see, in Lightroom, when you export a picture, you pull up your export dialog box. You've seen that, right? Okay, so right down here, under File Settings, I pick a format, and right here is a color space.
Okay.
All right, and there you can select different kinds of RGB color spaces. Also, if you've got a
The printer?
yeah, if you've got a photo printer, you can actually import from your device driver into Lightroom, so Lightroom knows natively how to calibrate the output specific to the printer.
That was a question I was gonna ask you.
Does that say Canon?
Yeah,
Oh, cool.
yeah, Canon makes great printers.
Calculus too.
You're right.
Yeah, but all SLRs are just so right in the other file.
Yeah. Anyway, and I have one here for my monitor because I do work with magazines, and I use this to calibrate my monitor outputs to the different stock papers that they use.
Now, does your monitor itself have to be programmable to get that color space?
Not to get the color space because it's a display. It's always going to talk in RGB. Well, all I'm doing here is I'm outputting something that I can then go back and look natively on my display outside of Lightroom, and it's going to be a little bit better
But is
calibrated.
that-
to the
That's
line.
only, that's somewhere else in calibration. Is that only available on higher end monitors, or is that any monitor?
We'll talk about calibration in a slide coming up. Okay, so in Lightroom, like I said, you're going to have all these different RGB color spaces to try out. And again, if you're having problems with your Print Labs package, you play around with, you pick this Pro Photo, like I said, that's going to have more color depth. But if your picture doesn't have any more color depth, it can't automatically make it. It could take advantage of color depth that's there.
So they send you a file and you gotta import it into here?
Exactly, and they'll give you instructions on where to put. It's just a folder in Lightroom that you can go in, and
And you
it's
export
in
your picture
Adobe.
using that.
And you can export your picture using that profile, and it'll be better calibrated to that. But like I said, most labs don't do that anymore. I don't know. I don't talk to every lab, so I can't say for sure. But if they ask you, I need your output in CMYK, you say, give me your profile, and what you do, you put it in there. It's the same profile is going to work with Lightroom and Photoshop. You just
So
put
it
it in.
doesn't change, like, so if you got your picture the way you want it, like, I usually, when I'm in Lightroom, like, if all my stuff is in Adobe first, like, in your camera, whatever that camera thing is, and then if I change it to, like, camera standard or landscape or vivid, the colors change, so when you export, is it gonna change the colors? too,
Well,
or no?
what you're doing in your camera is you're making changes. Even if you save a raw, if you've got Vivid turned on your camera, the thumbnail that's generated is going to take on the properties that you set in any of those creative color options in your camera.
No,
But it
no,
doesn't
I-
affect the actual
yeah.
raw image.
I only change it when I get in Lightroom, like if it comes in as Adobe standard,
Yeah.
I might change it to camera standard or camera portrait or something else.
Oh, okay.
But then it tweaks the color then, so like if I start doing my highlights and shadows first, and then I go change the camera kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
it changes the picture completely, I gotta go back and retweak
That's
all my
just,
stuff
it's just a
again.
preset. So once you apply that preset, then you go and change everything that's in the preset. You hit it again, it's gonna put everything back to what the preset was. No?
Do you need to calibrate your monitor too, because your monitor can be way off?
We're going to talk about that in a slide coming up, maybe even the next one.
I got a question now. Most cameras, you have sRGB and RGB, those are your choices. Where does the Pro Photo come into play then, if your camera doesn't have the ability to grab that color space?
Well, yeah, it's a bigger color space,
Oh,
so
there's
you.
some cameras that can grab that.
Yeah, if you've got a phase one, yeah, and and of course, some monochrome cameras don't have that even. They just have a luminance value. It's a black and white. Like phase 1 has that beautiful 101 megapixel black and white digital back. Holy cow, 101 megapixels of just luminance. It's freaking amazing. No noise. You shoot at 12,000 ISO, no noise, because it's that much dynamic range, because every single photo site is dedicated to just lumen. Amazing stuff. I'm sorry, I'm getting off track. But
Getting all nerdy on
yeah,
this.
yeah, I'm sorry. I geek out on stuff like that. And if I had $50,000-$60,000 to lay around and not doing anything, I would play around with something like that. Anyway, so yeah, those are the color spaces. Again, most of the time you don't really have to worry about them, because modern labs aren't worrying too much about it. But I will talk one other thing while we're talking about color spaces. That's some really neat things that you can do with a very particular color space. I think Mike posted an article on this this feature, and I played around with it a couple years ago. In Photoshop, you can change the image mode. You can change the color space that the photo is working in. And there's this one called Lab, which stands for luminance, and then there's an A and B channel. A shifts from like blue to cyan, and B shifts from yellow to red, or something like that, green to red. Anyway, it's a different color space altogether, but it can do some really amazing things in bringing up separation in certain channels, and just do so. It can make landscapes really, really pop. But be very careful. While Photoshop can allow you to physically change the color space of an image, that conversion is lossy. So don't go switching back and forth between them, or you'll just end up with mud. And so, make sure you save your original color space image and go play with copies of it while you experiment with it. But it's worth playing around with. I think, was it Mike Schmidt that posted? Anyway, there's several really good videos on using lab color space to do really, really beautiful, fine detail adjustments in Photoshop. And I've done it, like I said, a half a dozen times, and it works great. Do it as like the very last thing you do. So it's, you lose least amount of data along the way. All right. Gosh, why does it start over from the beginning? This is kind of annoying.
Because it hates you.
Yeah, okay. Who knows what Pantone colors are? Well, okay, so Pantone was a pigment company up in New York. Started in the 50s as some other name, and anyway, their claim to fame was they chemically analyzed pigments across the visible spectrum, and they gave them standardized numbers. Pantone Green 103 is Pantone Green 103. So if you're shooting a product, let's say, I don't know, Purple Widget Company says, Jim, I'm going to give you $10,000 to do product shots of our Purple Widget. Very first question is, can you give me the Pantone code for this color of this? So I know, what, no matter where I output that, I can color correct and make their Purple 357 Purple 357, and it is spot on the right color. Because like I said, you go printing stuff, colors off, people are going to know it. They may not know what's wrong with it, but they're going to know. And if I've created a product, I've painstakingly chosen the colors of my product.
Some companies, I won't say which ones,
Yeah,
have particular colors for their logo, and it can vary.
yeah,
It cannot go a little brighter, darker, orange,
It-
red, blue.
yeah.
Gotta be spot
Yeah.
on every time.
Flags of the world have standardized Pantone codes associated with, because they want you to reproduce the fields on their flags exactly correctly. And so, those codes are really important. So if you get an assignment to do something where color is important, like a fashion photography, it's a gray hat, but how many shades of gray are there? Infinite, right? So, yeah, 50. Yeah. Oh yeah, you were in that. Right? You were in that, weren't you, Pete? So anyway, I just wanted to mention Pantone tones because they are very important, especially if you've got customers where color is important to their products. Here's a visual difference between RGB and CMYK for black color spaces. that little thing you can't see, that's a Pantone chart.
You've got lots of libraries in Pantone. Which one do you use the most?
I use whatever my customer tells me. So if a customer is going to give me the Pantone code, I'm going to ask him which catalog he's using. And, you know, they have new colors come out every year, right? They got the color of the year and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
So wait, the Pantone chart has nothing to do with the, I guess it's a hex value of a color?
No, because every system is different. This is a chemically derived code. So they chemically analyze the pigment in the product to derive that particular thing. And so now you know that no matter whether it looks right on your monitor or not, if you provided it in the right if you've color graded to that particular tones, if the color's off, it's somebody else's. It's the printer's problem. They didn't, calibrate properly. So
This is just a particular chart, there are hundreds of other charts out there.
yeah, there's different variations on the Pantone charts. And some have more colors than not.
Each tone has its own number.
Yeah. Okay, here's this one, to calibrate or not to calibrate. And I hope for a nice heated discussion on this. Your operating system allows you to do a moderate amount of color correction, calibration of your monitor. So it just pulls up and shows you like some shades of gray, and if you see blues or greens in there, to go into the monitor controls and change the tint, and you can calibrate your display to a certain extent. And those are free. There's the Windows 10 wizard, and there's the Mac one for XOS. And to tell you the truth, for me, that's worked out great. I've never had to go and buy a Spider or one of these sensor-based calibration machines. So that Spider literally sits on your display. It's got an array of sensors that the software is going to throw a pattern on there of these various colors, and it's going to analyze it. There's also a sensor on the back that reads the ambient light in the room to do a white balance correction based on there, and it's going to use all that information to show you how to best calibrate your display. They range anywhere from $200 to $1,000. So I guess if I worked for National Geographic and I had a really big budget, I'd probably have one or two of those around. Or if a customer came to me and said, Jim, I'm paying you 10 grand to shoot that purple widget, I would probably take some of my profits and I would buy one of those. But so far I've gotten away with just doing this. And it's worked well for me, and I just do it with every new monitor, new video card. Anytime I make a major computer upgrade, like went to Windows 10 or whatever, I just go through the wizard and calibrate to that.
That's in the control panel?
Uh,
I've never seen it.
For in Windows, just right-click anywhere on your desktop, go into monitor properties, and it's one of those menus. It just says calibrate, and it just walks you through that. It takes a couple of minutes. It does a gamma correction, so gamma correction is basically just changing the balance of red to blue to green. And so greens might be too prominent on your display, in your driver for your monitor, and it can help you correct that by showing you some gray patterns. And once that's done, like I said, then it'll go through a number of different things. Yeah, go ahead, Annette. You had a question.
Is there's something you can get for like a laptop that you put on, because you know how when you open or close the top just a little?
It makes it a little bit brighter, darker by tilted.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, all displays are going to have artifacts that come into effect if you're anywhere off of perpendicular to the display. OLED displays on smartphones are notorious for giving you these weird golds and blues if you look to the side. Yeah, so it's just an artifact of the technology. And sometimes that's good, right? The person on the airplane can't see what's on your laptop because they're beyond 10 degrees from perpendicular to this display, and so they can't see it. Anybody have a Spider or any of these other calibration kit
I
things?
got one recently, and
Yeah?
I haven't used it yet.
You haven't used it yet.
Well, yeah,
The book is this thing.
Yeah. No, they should be pretty easy to use. I mean, it just puts a picture on your display. It says put the target here, and it runs through the wizard and tells you what to tweak, right? I mean, you said you haven't done it yet, but that's what I've seen them do. And some people swear by them. Got to do it. Got to do it. Got to do it. And
So now we know where to borrow one, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah. Mike's lending library.
I'll let you know how easy it is.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Compression, everybody's favorite. So, who wants to give a definition of compression?
Compression, it takes any, what's the best way to put this? It takes it gives each value a number, and then takes that number and gives it another reference point. So everywhere it's this color gray, that's compressed down to a little 1 or 0 or a bit of a byte, and it's translated somewhere, and go ahead. I know what it does,
Yeah.
have a hard time putting it into words.
That's a good try. So I think what you were describing at the very beginning was a lossless compression. It's going to read the string of bytes in your image, and it's going to say, hey, for the next 137 bytes, I've got the exact same color value. So instead of saying that same byte 137 times, it's going to say, repeat this color 137 times. It takes up like 3 bytes. So now it goes through your entire image, and it just basically, it looks at common areas. So if you got a lot of black in your image, you got a lot of areas in your image where the same color appears linearly as it scans through your image, you can take a fairly large file, make it a very small file, and not lose any digital resolution because it's just going to recreate it. Does that make sense? Right? It's just going to reconstruct it when it pulls it back together. Lossy compression looks at an area and what's going on around the area, and it uses an algorithm to best say, oh, I could probably reproduce this area, and use this as a formula to come up with a small amount of data to represent that area. So who's seen in like JPEG files, you get this kind of banding effect, especially in like dark skies, you get those weird bands. Yeah, so that's the lossy compression, trying to reconstruct, but not doing a perfect job of putting those beautiful gradations back in there where you want it. Or worse, those horrible blocky artifacts in transition areas, right? We see with Facebook all the time. You upload a picture that was gorgeous on your computer, you put it up on Facebook, and now not only is it soft, but if you zoom in on it, you get all these crazy little blocky looking, that color wasn't even there. Well, that's that lossy compression where JPEG or whoever's employed a lossy compression technique to shrink the file size down. Not the end resolution. The end resolution when it's reconstituted is the same resolution, but you have lost data along the way, so you've lost detail.
But why is it every time you open a JPEG, you lose something? You open and close, you lost something.
And that's not the
Not
case.
true?
No, not the
Who
case.
said that?
No, not the case. You open it read only, you're not making any changes to any bits.
That's why I asked, because I didn't
Yeah.
understand. I've heard that before, though.
Yeah, that's not the case. Now, it could be every time you export a JPEG, you could turn it into mud pretty quickly. If you're applying the same lossy compression over and over again, yeah, you can turn a picture into mud very quickly doing that. All right. Popular file formats. Where did I get this? I'll have to put a link on the YouTube video. I'll put a link to this. This just kind of talks about a lot of the different file formats that are out there, whether they're lossy or lossless compression, what kind of color spaces they support. A lot of interesting things about file formats that you maybe never considered. Things like, does it support layers? Well, TIFF does, JPEG doesn't. Is that important? Well, it's important if you wanted to preserve, say, some work you did in Photoshop with layers. You wanted to be able to not lose that when all that work that you did in case you want to come back and make some other edits. TIFF is a format that'll allow you, with a checkbox, to save those layers. Now, it'll be a much bigger file, right? Because it's not going to collapse that down into a single array of bits. But those layers are preserved. You can bring them back into Photoshop. You can continue working on those layers and continue tweaking and tuning. That's something really important to know. Other things important to know about output file formats, alpha channels. So GIFs and JPEGs don't support an alpha channel. What's that? It's an area of the file that has no color. It's blank, it's clear. PNG and TIFF and some others support an alpha channel. So if you, I don't know, maybe I'm doing that product photography for that purple widget and I wanted to save product with no backgrounds and use that to be able to port it, bring it in and put it in whatever setting I wanted to. I need to know that I need to save those in a file format that supports an alpha channel so that there's no white background that I've got to keep cloning out every single time. It's just gone, it's clear. So what are some of the neat properties? If I could read this. Let's see, yeah, lossless animation support. Boy, don't we love all those GIFs on Facebook. Whether it's licensed, whether it supports layers, who is it developed by, commonly used for, and then there's a column there that talks about what those different file formats are used for. And I think I've got a second slide that has even more crazy, really esoteric ones. We all know about PDS and PSDs and that sort of thing. So it's nice to be able to, when you go to have a choice on what file format to export, what's important for that particular picture. So it's nice to know what properties are there and what it supports, right? And it's important to have lots and lots of file formats. I feel that's my whole IT career in a nutshell. 30 years of more protocols, more file formats, more things, more that, and they all just seem to proliferate endlessly. All right, any other questions on outputting for print? Think you got any handle on that? I don't know if I have any other great words of wisdom on that. Oh, I did want to say something, and we talked about this in the last workshop. You were saying you're really, when you get stuff back from that print lab and it's kind of flat or muddy or dark or whatever, calibrating your monitor will do a little bit. I have found in my experience, go send them off a small picture. It's only going to cost you $1, right? For a small 6x8, 8x10, whatever it is. Just go send that. Bring it back. When you get it back in the mail in a couple of days, bring it to your monitor and say, oh, look how much darker this is. Now take your monitor and adjust it so that the color and the vibrance and everything about your monitor matches that image that you got from the printer. Write those settings down and remember it, so when you're editing to go to that same print shop, just set your monitor to those same settings again. Now edit to your desired look. When you get it back from that print shop, it'll look like the way you want it to.
Rather than just pray. I'm throwing it out there, you know.
Yeah, and that's to me, that's been really helpful. So like I said, I work with some magazines and I've got monitor settings for every single one of the press papers that they use, and sometimes they'll change it, right? So I have to go back every issue and look at it and say, oh, did they change something, you know, and if they have changed it, then I'll go and I'll calibrate again and change my little notes in my notebook and go with it. But if I'm printing a $500 or $1,000 large print for a customer, I don't want to get it back and say, oh, it's too dark or the color's off. I really want to have sent a test shot off, come back and make sure that I've got a very high confidence that when I send off that $1,000 order, it's not going to come back and I'm going to end up eating something big and expensive. So that's what I do. What do you do, Pete?
Well, something to touch on, the difference between DPI, PPI, because there are print shops that are gonna request one or the other at a minimum. I don't have an issue with it, but I don't know if everybody else knows it. I mean, this is something you gotta deal with when you're exporting the file.
Yeah, but I've always figured, I don't understand why. Why do they care? I'm giving them an image at a resolution and I'm telling them to print it at a certain size. They care about DPI when they send that file to their printer. I shouldn't care what DPI, in fact, I don't even know what those fields in the export boxes really do. It's still going to be the same file at the same resolution. I'm still sending them the same number of bits. Putting a little tag in the file saying what the DPI should be, they're going to fix that when they go to print it based on what the size of the print I've ordered is. They're going to create that. So the only thing in the world that really cares about DPI are scanners and printers.
I mean, that might be a dinosaur at this point. That might
Yeah.
be left over from the olden days.
Yeah. So I don't really understand why they would want that stuff unless you were basically, to me it's saying, print this at the DPI I've told you, and it's going to be as large as it is, not a specific size. And that doesn't make any sense to me because you never order things that way. And come in and be surprised at the size. You always order it by the size.
I need that 23 and a quarter by 16 by 8.
Yeah. Right. So I don't know why those fields exist. I really don't. I understand that they exist if you're going to send it to your own local printer, because you need to be able to tell your printer, I'm going to, I want you to print this at some resolution, and then it's going to scale it to that resolution as opposed to, whatever. And it's got to fit on the paper, right? It's got to fit on whatever your printer can support. Exporting to social media. So we've touched on this again in the last workshop about optimizing your output for social media. How many times have you taken a beautiful, crisp picture, you posted it up on Facebook, and you looked at it, and it looked like mud? Facebook compression is horrible. And I can't blame them because they get thousands of pictures a minute worldwide. They can't keep my 50 megabyte panorama of the Golden Gate Bridge at 50 megabytes. They would, I don't care how big their pockets are, they're going to run out of petabytes real fast. So they have to compress. So the best thing you can do is play their game and optimize to the point where they're not going to compress your image. And right now on Facebook, that size for just posted images is 1200 pixels on the long edge. So on your export dialog box, just select in the scaling panel, say longest edge 1200 pixels. Facebook will take that in and they will not munge up your picture any more than, or they'll do a minimal amount of munging on your picture. How about that? And you'll end up with a much crisper picture. So there's an example of where a lower resolution picture in the end is going to give you a sharper, better, more higher resolution image because they're not going to compress the poop out of it.
So when you said share images on timeline, that's the ones you share like the groups and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
you post. Yeah, it's in your post, right? You've made a post and you've included a picture to it. All the other stuff, like the cover photo, that's the banner. That's what they call the banners, the cover photo. Those are specific resolutions. If you scale to those exact resolutions, when you post them, again, they won't
In
get...
that box?
One, they'll fit in the box, and you'll know exactly what will or won't get cut off, because you can only slide it up and down or whatever to make it fit. But if you already crop it to that, you're going to be in better shape. And if you scale it to exactly that resolution, then no compression. And there's all the other stuff that they do in. I'll post a link to these tables in the Facebook, or I mean the YouTube video comments. I don't use Twitter. I'm not very interested in where I am 90% of the time, so why would anybody else care where I am or what I'm doing 90% of the time? So I don't.
But it's good if you have a problem. I don't use it either, but if you have a problem with a product, the minute you tweet, apparently you get a response.
Yeah, so customer support starts with Twitter in this day and age. Well, I'm still not going to do it. But there you go. There's the same kind of information you might be useful if you tweet. I do Instagram a lot, and I find it really powerful to work to the scale that, again, is going to be optimized for social media. I have yet to get my little Instagram plugin for Lightroom to properly scale without making it an additional step. Or I export to a folder that's included in the catalog and then go to that folder and publish from there. So there is an extra step to make your resolution of your picture just right when you publish to Instagram from inside Lightroom. If you're still old school and you're putting it in a Dropbox and dragging it to your phone or whatever and doing it the native Instagram way, well, there you go. You're going to export anyway.
Export it out of Facebook into Instagram.
That's what I did.
What's that?
Export it out of Facebook right into Instagram, so it's not an extra step, it's just an extra export.
I usually go the other direction from Instagram to Facebook. I'll post it to Instagram and it posts to Facebook at the same time.
Oh, yeah, from Facebook to Instagram. I'm talking directly from Lightroom to Instagram.
I'm not high tech yet. Different Lightroom to Instagram. Way too high tech for me.
I just mail 2,000 people a picture every day.
Yeah.
And there's the data for Pinterest for you pinheads. Oh, did I say that?
That one, I don't get Pinterest, I don't understand it.
It used to be really cool, now it's really, it seems to
I
me.
don't even see pictures of cake.
Well,
I-
but it's very formulaic.
Yeah, I agree. It's where copycats are born, right? You see one interesting Pinterest, and then you see 8,000 other people doing the exact same thing, whether it's a product or a shot or whatever. I will say, for my own part, I take all the images on my website and I put them in pin boards so that they're there, and I get an awful lot of traffic to my website from those pins. So it works still. There's still people that are trolling through it and coming across my pictures, at least getting them to my site. I don't know how many converted to customers, but at least they're, it's generating traffic. So anyway.
Interesting.
That's it. That's all I had. What did I miss?
That was great.
You talked, you mentioned earlier about, and somebody else said also about pictures always come out dark.
Mm-hmm.
So is that something you gotta keep in mind if you're gonna, hey, I need to lighten this up?
Yeah, my personal rule of thumb is you lose about 2/3 stop of light when you from your monitor to any printed medium. Maybe a little less with metal because light reflects back through the medium from the metal. But like I said, back to those monitor profiles. Normally when I'm just using my monitor, I set it at 50, brightness at 50, just like it came out of the box. When I'm editing for magazines, it's somewhere between 7 and 9. It's really much lower. So everything about it just feels dark, but I edit to that and I set my exposure and brightness and highlights and everything to that mode. And then when the prints come back, they look great. So.
I just adjusted a little bit more on all my prints, because all my prints are normally kind of dark, so I just up the exposure a little bit, and that's my fallback.
Is
That's
it-
my
is it
fallback,
that
but
the-
it just seems like I'm guessing. Oh, I think
guess
I'll
it
go
was
up a
your
little
little
bit,
bit.
but I want something
Well-
more formulaic. Like, I like this idea of having my monitor calibrated to a specific picture or wherever MPix or
Yeah,
Bay
right.
Photo or whatever, and having that actual.
Right, and if you use a lot of different labs, of course, you're gonna have to do that a lot of different times, but, we all tend to kind of, we start trying out 3 or 4 labs and we like one, so we use it for that kind of printing, and then, I use Miller's for most of the paper type products, and I'll use, other labs for canvases and another lab for acrylics and stuff like that, because they specialize in that stuff, right? So, yeah. I just have a little folder that I keep tucked away. I don't let light get in there and ruin those test pictures, right? So I pull them out when I need to, and I make sure that when I settings and I pull the picture out and I confirm, yep, that's exactly, still looks good. Put it back away, start my edits, and get it all out the
Is
door.
it that the picture is dark, or is it that the colors are muted?
Well, you can have both.
Because
Yeah.
if it's just the colors are muted, you might want to just adjust the vibrance in the picture instead of bumping up the whole exposure.
And it could just be one channel. Certain printers, like I found, we're trying to think what lab I was playing around with. Everything came back green. There was a horrible green tint. I mean, just to the average person, you may not ever notice it, but to me, I saw green in everything. That one channel was different in in their editing process, their printing process, than other labs. And until you put 2 pictures from 2 different labs side by side, you really can't tell what's wrong. You say, there's something not quite right, and then you put it side by side, and sure enough, there it is. So it's not just bumping overall vibrance. You may have to go in channel by channel and tweak.
Canvas, I've heard, destroys reds. It basically, mutes them, it dulls them. So, I had a really nice picture I printed on canvas and did one on photo paper as well. And the reds they were almost absent on the canvas, where, on the photo paper.
Yeah, to me, I found that's an artifact of the gesso that they use. That's the coating on the actual cotton fabric, and the brighter it is, the shinier, glossier it is, the less you have that problem, because it's absorbing less of the pigment, right? So it's reflecting the true color of the ink that's on top of it.
It's just being absorbed.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where you go to a quality canvas shop like Artsy Couture. You're going to pay 4 times as much for that, but they're really good at reproducing the colors. Where if you just go to like Canvas People or one of these places, you always see these like $10 sales. They even may look great when you get them back, but the color's going to fade really quickly. So I try to steer my customers
What do you
away.
use for the acrylics?
What is the name of that place?
Art Speeds or something like that. Like, it's one out of California.
Yeah, and they do great, like
Yeah,
they'll
like
do
huge
crazy they'll do big panoramic panels as well.
I've seen the ad for the guy. He's holding up this picture.
Then-
Grand Canyon, something like that.
Yeah, the name escapes me, but I'll pull it up. So here's an example of so took this picture years ago. I took my son to a Formula One race out in Texas, and I didn't color correct. I sent this picture to, it looked great on my monitor, but I hadn't calibrated my monitor. I didn't understand any of this stuff. I sent it off to a place that, you know, not all that great. And so this is what I got back. And it looks like we've got our skin peeled off pink. And I don't know what's going on here, but anyway. So that's a great example of like a horrible canvas. And I never even hung this on the wall. I just basically demanded my money back, and then I don't know, kept it just for the heck of it. But yeah, so that's a bad color lab process. What's that? Yeah. So anyway, I keep that around to show my customers what you get when you go to and get cheap canvases made, and usually that gets them to buy the right thing. So.
Does anybody use a local printer
Canvas?
for
I've
files?
used Star Mark once years ago.
Are they still around?
There were a couple years ago.
Star Imaging,
Star,
Mark Imaging.
yeah. this is-
Is that for Coulson?
They're still there.
That's that little tiny place, right?
Yeah.
This little
Yeah.
tiny, yeah.
They're still there, and I think they still print, but they don't print metal anymore, like they don't print on metallic paper or something. Somebody was
Yeah.
messaging me because she saw my post.
I wasn't overly impressed on what I got out of it. Mostly I use Nations for paper, just because I haven't searched at anybody else, and I haven't had issues with it. And for canvases, CG Brooklyn's.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna tell Daniel, when you take an order from somebody, like, who went through this yesterday, have them pay you from PayPal. Make the order from PayPal, so no money comes out of your pocket, and you're done, hands off.
Good.
Does Kodak do any?
Careful what you
processing?
chief.
Will Kodak do any anymore, or they,
Kodak, who's that?
they don't do it anymore?
You mean the company that invented the digital camera?
Hey, with us.
Huh?
With us.
Yeah.
It was a cold,
Oh, the CCD was a Canon sensor?
there's a Canon body with a Kodak bottom on it.
No. I'm talking about the original digital camera. Just with the cassette tape recorder was the media. I'm not kidding. You ever seen it? It's a big, ugly, light blue box with all these circuit cards in it, and a CCD sensor, and basically a lens taped to the thing, and a cassette tape for recording the photograph.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the birth of the digital camera back in like '76 or something like that.
They took a
Might be
picture
good
of
for
Lincoln.
videos.
Yeah.
Anybody else have like recommendations for labs that you use?
I use Nation for all my stuff so far.
Nation for everything?
Well, I did one canvas for Gene and our group, and that's the last time I ever did a canvas, and I just don't like myself on canvases. I'd rather put on metal. Like I love putting myself on metallic paper and on aluminum. My next step is to go to acrylic and glass.
And when you print on metal paper, do you have it put on like foam core or something to make it stiff before you
No,
frame it? Or
I
you
just put it on. I tape it to the double matting, and I frame it, and I leave it just like that, and it fits just fine inside it.
And it doesn't wave?
No, you don't. You could, because I keep the backing on the back of it, and I keep the separation so that way it looks flat. So when you look at it, you're like, oh, okay.
And you don't put glass over those, right?
I put glass over it
Oh, you did?
on the paper, metallic paper on the aluminum. No, that's around the wall. it pops just fine without anything attached to it. Now, somebody told me you could put that in frames. A guy in Hawaii told me I could put them things in frames, and he showed me exactly how to do it in frames, but I haven't got a chance to get around to doing that type of stuff. I will probably the next couple months, so put all my stuff in frames for my metal stuff. Because you want to emphasize a little bit more than what it is, especially if it's like,
But then you're gonna lose edge, right?
no, you're just,
Frame.
you put it on there and you put a flat frame.
Oh,
So it's really a backing, but it's made out of wood, but it looks sharp. That's the way I just like doing mine. You want to stand out from everybody else's. You don't want to like, oh yeah, that's identical, that's identical, that's identical. You want your stuff to look different.
Like yours on metallic paper out there when we first came in, is that a backing on that, or is that the way it came when you ordered it?
I always order mine backing from the lab because they can always do a perfect job, and just one little bit of dust is going to ruin it if I do it myself, right? I've backed stuff before, but I've never really been happy with the way I do it. Plus, they're going to back it before they trim the thing, so it's going to be a perfect trim job. And so that's why I don't have any frames. Well, one reason I don't have any frames on those pictures out there is so I can show the customer the backing, the paper, the coating, all those things you can see because it's not trapped inside a
but you
frame.
could take one of those off the wall and just stick it in a frame. the
Oh
way
yeah,
it is.
absolutely. And I've got different backings. So I've got foam core, matte board, styrene, masonite.
What's masonite? Is that like wood?
Yeah, it's a fine particle board kind of stuff. So you can see them, and you know, different. I use different. I recommend different backings for different kinds. So if you're going to put it in a big frame and a matte with glass over it, you can use matte board, which is inexpensive and lightweight, but it is going to warp slightly. Matte board warps because it's a paper product, and so the glue in the manufacturer is going to cause it to warp a little bit. But that's usually okay if you got a trim mat around it and glass, you've got that gap and it looks fine. If you're going to hang them frameless, then I recommend different kinds of backing depending on the size too, because some of them can get really expensive, the larger sizes. But probably the most common is that masonite. It's relatively inexpensive. It's very strong.
Comes with the hardware attached?
You can get a hardware attached, but I just do my own. I just get the little tooth brackets. I buy them in bulk from Amazon, and I just epoxy them on the back, and there you go. So
Yeah, I do that with epoxy on my hand, just stuck, you know, stuck to the picture.
Now, is there a different, you know, from paper to aluminum to glass to anything else, is there different recommendations for the type of picture to go on?
I think it's personal preference. Like you know, for me, I almost image by image. If I've got a lot of really interesting highlight tones, I like to see it on metal because that really brings out those highlights in a luster. Acrylics and full metals, not just metal paper, but full metals tend to really reflect or bring up the vibrance in your color. So if color is the primary thing you're looking at in your image, those work great. For family portraits and stuff, I still think paper, and some of the papers today are amazing. It's not just one type of paper you can choose from. There's pearlescent papers, and there's linen papers, and there's you name it. You know, there's still the archival quality, museum quality paper. That's the standard. And then you can do all these coatings. So look out there on those pictures, and I've got 9 different kinds of coatings, from hand brush coatings to marbleized textures to things that almost look like canvas. And so you can get these coatings, these UV coatings that are texturized to add a little bit of something else to the picture, especially when you're I've got a big picture and you're exploring it a bit. The texture kind of adds a little bit to the story, so there's that as well.
It's all about preference. That's the biggest thing. If you find something you really like, go for it. If you look at something like, well, I don't like myself in canvas. Well, let's try this. Well, I don't like it on this. Well, let's try this. And you just keep ballparking like, well, let's try this. And that's how you'll come up with a better product and something you want to hang on your wall. Like, Jim has a ton of stuff on his walls, like you go to some other people's houses, they have nothing, like my house don't have no pictures on my wall at all, because I just don't like my stuff hanging on my walls, but it all comes down to preference on what people see in your stuff, like, well, that look great, and it's like, oh, I'll give it a shot. That's how most of my pictures came about, because in fact, someone's like, that would look good in metal. It's like, well, let's try, see what happens. That's what happens a lot of times.
Also has a lot to do with the look you want. If you want a more classical or more classy look, like I've done a waterfall on canvas, it almost looks like a painting. A lightning storm on canvas to me wouldn't work like that. That goes on metal, I want that to pop. So,
Yeah, plus it's the fine detail. In canvas, you're going to lose a lot of fine detail. So I was telling a customer today, they were going to have me shoot this family portrait of 15 people. And they wanted it on canvas. And I said, you're going to have to start at 20 by 30 or get bigger, or those poor little kids, you won't be able to recognize them. You put that on an 8 by 10 and you might as well paint smiley faces on it because you lose so much detail in canvas. And so, we talked about that sort of stuff and, just what it's going to look good.
that one I had done, a 48 by 32 canvas
Yeah, nice.
of the ship.
Yeah.
I mean, I was impressed when I got this thing. I was like, holy, wow, look at this thing. And the resolution wasn't astronomical. It was only 150 dpi. But because it was on canvas and because of the subject matter, it didn't have to have that tack sharp. I didn't have to see somebody's eyeball in it,
Yeah. Yeah, and canvas can hide a lot of sins too, right? If you didn't get that eye perfectly sharp and you put it on canvas, who's going to know? Only you, because you're the only one who's be able to see it. Canvas kind of hides that. I'm not saying it's a crutch. I'm just saying different things look better on canvas than
When I
they
hung it up on
don't.
the wall and they came in and they were like, wow. 'Cause I mean, it's in their face.
So what things do you kind of recommend canvas?
That's all. I have no clue.
Okay, again, to me, anything that you don't need absolute clarity on, any landscape is gonna look good on canvas, I think. But that's me, it's my preference. I like that classy look, I like the.
Oh, would
the
you do
wa-
Milky Way on? Would you do it on canvas?
I would do it on
or
canvas,
metal?
because it's kind of, I definitely lean towards metal, I wanna look at the acrylic, something like that. Something that's gonna have a lot of reflection back to it.
I'm gonna actually want to try lightning on acrylic next. That'll be the next thing I want to try. This year I'll play around with that a lot more to see what happens.
On acrylic though, you don't have that reflective surface of the metal to bring that
Oh, you don't?
brightness back up. It is?
I'm asking you.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it really depends on the acrylic. If it's, if it's backed with a foil or something like that, then you would. So anything that has illuminated subjects in it, lights on a pier, stars, all that stuff, those all look great on metals because you're going to get natural illumination back through the, from that shiny metal behind the ink and really brings that stuff back out again. So.
What about glass? You've done glass, you said?
I've done a handful of glass pieces for my customers.
Is it behind it or?
Yeah, it's usually printed behind,
Okay.
and some acrylics as well. They take and they invert it and they spray it behind there so you get the perfect.
So, oddball question. If you were to put that in a shadow box and have a light behind it, would it enhance it? I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen one.
Oh, I think so. I mean, remember what was it, Kincaid or the painter? You'd get kind of that effect in it, but I think you'd have to be really, really careful how much light is coming back out of that shadow box. You'd want a very small amount, and you'd want to be able to control it.
Okay.
So if you were going to build that shadow box, what I would recommend is be like LED strip lights around the edges that's controllable, so you can bring it all the way down. So you're just adding just enough light so it doesn't come off cheesy, right? Because you can blow that thing out and just make it look like yeah. And you're right. Yeah, the brighter they are, of course, you're going to see the individual LED elements and then it's going to be uneven.
As I said, diffuse it.
Yeah, you have to diffuse it with something.
If it could be backlit, I think that could be real interesting.
Yeah.
If it's one of those on a stand with the little light behind it.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if you print on metal paper, what kind of frame do you get to go with it? Just like a metal frame?
Well, the metal paper still has a backing paper, just like any other photo paper.
Okay.
It's
So-
like tinfoil.
Yeah, it's
No, I know, but you still have to put it in a frame, and I'm
I
thinking
just-
you wouldn't put a metal print in a wood frame, right?
Yeah, why not? You
I just go to
add
home.
it and
Yeah.
frame it
Oh,
anytime
you
you want
did?
it.
Okay.
I just go to
So it's just the
Michael's.
type of paper, it's not that it's,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
If you go to Michael's and just get, they normally have them on sale. I go when they always have sales, and it's, normally you get pretty good sales at
Okay.
Michael's. And I just get the ones that's like, you first walk in a black frame, it's like white, you got double matting, good enough for me. It's not overly priced.
Okay.
We should have them fill it for $300.
Yep,
Yeah.
that too.
Gotta wait for those 50% coupons. All right. Anything else, guys?
I don't.
Good conversation.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you all.
He said he was giving me a 6-foot hero.
What? That's you. That's you, Pete. You're the 6-foot hero.